In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King holds talks in Astana with Kazakh leaders and addresses an interfaith conference saying terrorists are the outlaws of Islam, but there are 1.5 billion good Muslim men and women. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff says the United States is considering replicating the creation of a new U.S. military hub in Anbar in other parts of Iraq. And 200 countries taking part in climate change talks express concern at the slow progress of preparatory meetings ahead of a Paris summit in December set to reach a final deal. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King held talks with Kazakh President Nursultan Nazarbayev in the Kazakh capital, Astana. During bilateral talks at the Kazakh Presidential Palace and a luncheon in honor of His Majesty and his accompanying delegation, the two leaders asserted their mutual enthusiasm to consolidate bilateral relations, namely in the economic and investment fields. His Majesty and Nazarbayev also emphasized the need to ramp up efforts to revive peace negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis based on the two-state solution and international legitimacy resolutions. Separately, His Majesty met Kazakh Prime Minister Karim Masimov and discussed with him ongoing developments in the region. The meeting stressed the need to promote bilateral ties as well as capitalizing on existing agreements signed between the two countries. Counter-terrorism efforts were also on the meeting's agenda, in addition to bringing about peace and security to the Middle East. Also in the Kazakh capital, King Abdullah addressed the main session of the 5th Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions. His Majesty's remarks focused on terrorism as something alien to Islam, committed by outlaws of the religion, the Khawarij, who constitute a tiny minority of the world's Muslims, with the remaining 1.5 billion good men and women. Here's the King's full speech. More local and regional news after we take a listen.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the compassionate, Mr. President, my brother, let me thank you personally for hosting this distinguished 5th Congress. Your beautiful country, Kazakhstan, has a noble reputation as a link between East and West, a land of great achievements built on coexistence. Mostly, though, I want to thank you for consistently shining a global spotlight on interfaith dialogue. Today, such discourse is urgently needed as we stand against those who pose the greatest danger to our religion and to our world, the outlaws of our religion, the Khawarij. Ladies and gentlemen, in our world today, the vast majority of people are members of a spiritual community. Muslims and Christians alone make up more than half of humanity. We live side by side as fellow citizens, and yet our global community is under threat by aggressive forces targeting religious differences. Every major religion has had to deal with this evil, and we must all recognize it and counter it. We Muslims are facing a brutal attack by outlaws, Khawarij, who distort our faith to try to justify monstrous crimes. Nothing treats our religion with more contempt, nothing hurts the Muslim people more than the actions of these elements. They agitate sectarianism and sedition. They mislead young people into abandoning their futures. They franchise their violence worldwide. And this violence, whether against Muslims or Christians or minority communities, is utterly condemned by Islam. It is important for everyone to understand that these groups are only a tiny minority of the world's Muslims. 1.5 billion good men and women, but a drop of venom can poison a well. These groups grant themselves a free hand to distort and manipulate the word of God to further their twisted agendas. No Muslim can afford to be or to assume someone else will confront the threat. It is our fight for the sake of our faith and for the sake of our people. 10 years ago, Jordanians saw that it was essential to speak up on a global level. The Amman message set forth Islam's call: respect for others, compassion, social justice, mercy, tolerance, and consensus. This is the Islamic way. This is the path Jordan has taken. My friends, part of transmitting our values is putting them into action. When it comes to beating global terror, we need a holistic approach. And it begins by addressing the conditions that terror groups exploit. Economic inclusion is key. The circle of prosperity and opportunity must be enlarged to reach vulnerable communities and especially young people. There also needs to be an international commitment to relieve suffering in crisis zones and support political solutions that uphold national unity and promote a stable future. Refugees and their host countries need global support. This help sends a critical message that people in need do not stand alone, that we are all neighbors. Why do we make these efforts? Why do we work for peace and justice? The answer is simple. It is our duty. Our duty to fulfill the two great commandments of our faith: to love God and to love our neighbor. From this flows everything else: the equal dignity of all people, tolerance, coexistence, and faith. How many here really love our neighbor? How many here really see beyond differences to accept and love the other, the stranger? How many put God's love above all else? Muslims around the world know real faith is not violent or hate-filled. In Islam, God's names include the compassionate, the all-merciful. We wish each other, Assalamu alaikum, be blessed with peace. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the most merciful, the compassionate. إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات سيجعل لهم الرحمن ودا. Truly those who believe and perform righteous deeds, for them the compassionate one shall appoint love. Our faith teaches us what is wrong. It is wrong to insult and disrespect God and religion, wrong to discriminate and persecute others, wrong to disrespect places of worship. But we are also taught what is right. Right to respect and support each other, right to show mercy and kindness, right to work together for the common good. These values are shared by your religions as well as mine. Now we need to make them part of our daily lives and our moral responsibility to our communities. You who are leaders of religion have a critical role in showing the way and turning this world away from the evils of violence and division. I thank you for your long dedication, and I wish you success in the days ahead. God's blessings upon you all. Thank you.
Over to Syria, where fighters from Al-Qaeda branch the Nusra Front killed at least 20 Druze villagers in the village of Qalbloze in Idlib province, where the Nusra Front has seized wide areas from government control since March. A Syria state-run news agency, SANA, described the killing of the elderly people and a child as a massacre and expressed concern over the safety of minorities in the country. In another development, Syrian state television denied claims by rebels that they had taken over an army airport in southern Syria along the border with Jordan. A news flash said the army has so far repelled 3 attacks on the outskirts of the Atala airport, which rebels said they seized in a renewed offensive. The Syrian army also said a military plane has crashed in southern Syria and the cause was being investigated. Rebels earlier claimed they shot down a Russian-made MiG jet and released video showing a burnt-out plane near the site of heavy fighting around the besieged military airport. Chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, said the United States is considering replicating the creation of a new U.S. military hub in Anbar, elsewhere in Iraq, as the campaign against Daesh terrorist group advances. The hub will be located at the Taqaddum military base, which is only about 25 kilometers from Ramadi, the capital of Anbar province, which fell to the group last month. Dempsey said examination of such a possibility is just part of prudent planning. His comments came after U.S. President Barack Obama yesterday ordered the deployment of almost 500 additional U.S. troops to Iraq. The U.S.-led coalition, meanwhile, targeted the terrorist group Daesh in 29 airstrikes launched during the past 24 hours. According to the Combined Joint Task Force leading the operations, the 16 airstrikes in Syria and 13 in Iraq hit various Daesh fighting positions, fighting units, vehicles, buildings and other targets. Australia's Prime Minister Tony Abbott warned a summit on countering violent extremism in Sydney of the global threat posed by Daesh terrorists. 25 countries, including representatives from the UK and the US, are attending the summit, which will allow delegates to compare strategies to stop online radicalisation of young people. Foreign Minister Julie Bishop said that large numbers of women and young girls are affected by the group's actions. Abbott said negotiating with Daesh is not an option.
Daesh is coming, if it can, for every person and for every government with a simple message: submit or die. The declaration of a caliphate, preposterous though it seems, is a brazen claim to universal dominion. Now, you can't negotiate with an entity like this. You can only fight it.
And in Libya, meanwhile, Daesh group said they blew up 2 warplanes at an airbase they seized near the central city of Sirte. The terrorist group seized Sirte's military and civilian airport 2 weeks ago and have earlier this week seized a power plant in a western suburb of the city, completing a gradual takeover of Sirte that it began in February. Forces loyal to a self-declared government that controls the capital, Tripoli, had pulled out of the plant and air base. Libya's internationally recognized government has been working out of the east of the country since losing control of Tripoli and western Libya in August. And here at home, Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour reiterated the depth of ties between Jordan and the Kingdom of Bahrain in a meeting here in Amman with a Bahraini parliamentary delegation led by Speaker Ahmed bin Ibrahim al-Mullah. Addressing the latest developments in the region, Mansour said that Jordan is closely monitoring its borders to prevent the smuggling of drugs and weapons, as well as human trafficking, while also noting that the security and stability of the kingdom is closely linked to the security and stability of Gulf Arab states. The meeting also tackled conflicts in the region, as well as the Palestinian-Israeli issue and His Majesty's efforts to defend the Palestinian cause. Mansour briefed the meeting on challenges facing the kingdom as a result of hosting about 1.4 million Syrian refugees, added to the already existing 2.25 million Palestinian refugees and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, Yemenis and Libyan citizens, apart from other expatriates living and working in Jordan. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan urged the country's political parties to work quickly to form a new government, saying egos should be left aside and that history would judge anyone who left Turkey in limbo. In his first public appearance since last Sunday's parliamentary election deprived the ruling AK party of a majority, Erdogan said no political development should be allowed to threaten Turkey's gains. Sunday's vote ended more than a decade of single-party rule in Turkey, dealing a blow to Erdogan's ambitions for a more powerful executive role. Erdogan stressed he would do his part in finding a solution with the powers given to him by the constitution and called on all parties to participate in this process. A final deal between Iran and 6 world powers to curb its atomic program in exchange for sanctions relief is possible before an end-June deadline, according to Iran's envoy to the UN nuclear agency. The envoy, Riza Najafi, told reporters after a board meeting of the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna that if negotiators commit to the agreed parameters, a deal by the end of this month is achievable. When asked whether Iran would implement additional nuclear transparency measures as called for in an interim deal reached in April and offered managed access for inspectors to military sites, he said this should wait the final text of any deal. The United States had earlier told the IAEA board it remains critical for Iran to implement the provisions of the modified Code 3.1, which requires from Iran early notifications of the construction of new nuclear facilities. As UN climate change talks ended in Germany, several nations expressed growing unease that time is running short to resolve disputes about global warming. They say there was little progress towards an international deal scheduled to be agreed in December. Delegates representing almost 200 countries have been attending the Bonn preparatory meeting since the 1st of this month, but failed to confront major issues such as whether to set a global goal for phasing out greenhouse gases this century. There are only 2 preparatory sessions left, one in August and another in October, before a summit in Paris in December meant to agree a global deal. The United Nations said the talks were on track and that it is a step-by-step process.
It is really important to understand that this is a step-by-step process and that there has been very interesting progress here with the text. This is a very, very complex issue, even for those of us who live and breathe and eat this. It's very difficult for us to explain it to each other. I mean, I get on the phone and my daughters are, they've eaten climate change since they were born. And even for them, for me to explain, it's very difficult, let alone, to someone else who's completely out there.
In other news now, 3 astronauts landed safely in the steppes of Kazakhstan, ending their 199-day mission aboard the International Space Station. There was relief at the landing after the capsule, charred by extreme heat on re-entry, landed upright, allowing search and recovery teams to expedite the crew's evacuation. Russian cosmonaut Anton Shaklerov, followed by Samantha Cristoforetti of the European Space Agency and Expedition 43 Commander Terry Virts of NASA, were carried and put on semi-reclined chairs for a few minutes later for a breath of fresh air. The return of the crew was delayed for a month after a rocket failed to deliver a Progress cargo craft in late April. The belated homecoming leaves Cristoforetti as the new record holder for the single longest space flight by a woman.
And we have touchdown. You can see the reefing of the chute on the horizon. Touchdown at 8:44 a.m. Central Time, 7:44 p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan. The Expedition 43 crew, Terry Virts, Anton Shkaplerov, and Samantha Cristoforetti.
Lebanese theatre director Qasim Istanbuli brought theatre performances to the southern coastal town of Tyre with a 5-day international theatre festival. Performers from Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Tunisia, Spain and France participated in this year's event, which ran from the 6th to the 10th of this month. Istanbuli said his focus was to bring back theatre to the marginalised south. Activities remained free of charge for the public, with only a donation box set aside for those wanting to contribute towards its upkeep. Despite the financial difficulties, Istanbuli succeeded in renovating an old venue that used to serve as a theatre and cinema, the Hamra Theatre and Cinema, where the festival took place. The venue opened in 1952, but it was closed in 1989 amidst the Lebanese civil war. Spaniard Dani Sordo recorded the fastest time during Rally Italia shakedown in Sardinia, finishing just 200 milliseconds ahead of rival Chris Meek. And TJ Van Garderen took the lead of the Criterium du Dauphiné, finishing second on the 161-kilometre fifth stage in the Alps. The American BMC rider took the yellow jersey from Australian teammate Rohan Dennis, with BMC and 2013 Tour de France winner Chris Froome's Team Sky contesting the lead. French climber Romain Bardet shot past to take the lead and held onto the advantage up the final climb to the finish line at the ski resort of Prallo. Van Garderen got past Froome towards the finish and held the Briton at bay to take second place, 36 seconds behind Bardet for a 17-second overall lead in the standings. Finally, a look at the weather forecast. Cool tonight across much of the hilly areas and fair elsewhere in the country, with northwesterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, moderate weather is forecast for many regions, with low clouds over the northern and central regions as well. The Jordan Valley should expect a hot day. High temperatures will slightly exceed the 35-degree mark at the Dead Sea. Further south, hot and humid weather is forecast for the Gulf of Aqaba, with northerly fresh winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to end the news, our top stories once again. His Majesty holds talks in Astana with Kazakh leaders and addresses an interfaith conference saying terrorists are the outlaws of Islam, but there are 1.5 billion good Muslim men and women. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff says the United States is considering replicating the creation of a new U.S. military hub in Anbar in other parts of Iraq. And 200 countries taking part in climate change talks express concern at the slow progress of preparatory meetings ahead of a Paris summit in December set to reach a final agreement. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Rad Luptush. Thank you so much for your company.